Hey everyone, welcome to today's video. My name's Stephanie and today I'm so excited to be sharing Fauve's new Van Gogh 1.0 collection. As you can see, this is a massive 12-piece collection and we have a lot of shimmers with a couple of magnetics, a couple of glow-in-the-darks and thermals. And as you can expect, I have a ton of comparisons for these. So the timestamps for everything will be in the description box down below. I'll save some more information on these for the end of the video. For now, let me just show you the swatches. The first polish we have is Flare of Madness, and this is described as an orange base with red to orange to gold shimmer. This one had a beautiful formula. It was very pigmented, so smooth and easy to apply, very fluid, and I would say it self-leveled really nicely too. You can just see it's a little bit sheer on the first coat, but I think it looks great on two coats personally. If you look close enough, you definitely can make out some visible nail line, but I personally feel like the color is just so bold and the shimmer is so intense that it distracts from it. Maybe it's also because the shade of orange is like a little bit on the deeper side. It's not like a lighter yellowy orange, but of course you can always do a third coat. And here is more extreme lighting to see that shift to gold. Next up we have Lunar Halo, which is a yellow with green to blue to violet aurora shimmer and a green to aqua to blue to violet flaky in various sizes. As you saw, this had such a gorgeous formula. It was way more impressive than I was expecting it to be. I just thought it was going to be a lot more sheer. And don't get me wrong, it still is. It's not going to be a full coverage polish by any means. You'll see even on the third coat, there is still some visible nail line that you can see, but I don't know, I still just found it very pigmented at the same time and just very even coverage, so it was really glowy. Next we have the namesake of the collection. Here is Van Gogh, which is a green with orange to copper to gold aurora shimmer. This one is super beautiful. It again has a really smooth and fluid formula that was pigmented and even coverage, but as you can see, it is a little bit sheer on the first coat. It also has a slightly pearlescent kind of effect going on as well, so I would just be mindful to not have too much polish on your brush, because I find with shimmers like this, the more polish you have or the more thicker coats you do, the more brushstrokey it'll look. So I was a little bit more careful with my application on the second and third coat as seen here, and I feel like you can't really tell that the brushstrokes are there, or maybe they just also dissipate. But yeah, this one had a gorgeous orange glow, especially against that green base. Next we have one of the glow-in-the-dark shades. This is Absinthe Minded, which is an acidic lime or chartreuse with a green to indigo to violet aurora shimmer with a chartreuse yellow glow-in-the-dark effect. Personally, I think it's just like a typical green glow, but we'll see that at the end. So the formula on this one, as you can see, is definitely very sheer considering it's such a light color. I didn't struggle as far as the application goes. It still was very like smooth and easy to work with, but I didn't love how it self-leveled. I'm sure you could tell from the first coat, it was like a little bit patchy in some spots, and unfortunately that kind of shows through in the second coat and even a little bit in the third, but it definitely looks a lot better in 3 coats than 2 in my opinion, and it also does help with the glow-in-the-dark effect, though this does have the more grainy sort of finish, which isn't my personal favorite. Next we have the first magnetic, which is called Peacock Moth, and this is described as a lime green chartreuse with a lime green or yellow magnetic shimmer with various color shifting iridescent flakies that mainly shift between blue and violet. For whatever reason, the magnetic effect didn't look super strong when I held the magnet against the bottle, so that was almost concerning, but it magnetized so easily on my nail. I would say this has a little bit more of a jelly leaning kind of finish, so it was pretty sheer on the first coat and it builds up nicely in 2, but I still could make out some nail line, so I would recommend going in with 3 coats if you want a more full coverage look, especially with the cat eye effect. But I got really great coverage on 2 coats with the velvet effect, but either way the flakies really glow in this one. The other glow-in-the-dark is called Delirium, and it's described as a jungle green with a blue to violet aurora shimmer, along with a dainty holo, and this one glows green in the dark. So I love that this is described as a jungle green. I feel like this is one of those shades of green that leans a little bit teal, especially with the blue shimmer in here. It is so gorgeous though. This one also has a little bit of a jelly leaning formula. So you saw the first coat was definitely very sheer, but I found it very even coverage. So I thought it looked great on 2 coats, even though you still can make out some nail line. I decided to stop it here because I thought it was full coverage enough, but I did notice that the glow in the dark looked a little bit weaker, so it probably would benefit from a 3rd coat. Moving on to our first thermal of the collection, we have Electric Reverie, which is described as a green/aqua in the cold state as seen in the bottle that transitions to an electric lime when warm. This also has a vibrant green to indigo to violet aurora shimmer and a dainty holo. The formula on this one actually reminded me of Absinthe Minded, which was that bright chartreuse shade, because while it was like easy to apply, it still felt like a little bit patchy, especially on the first coat. And while it might not look like an issue here on the 2nd coat, that's because it's in the cold state. But then once we transition to the warmer state where it's the lighter color, you can really see that it's like a little bit uneven. So I would recommend doing a 3rd and just being careful with your application. Up next we have Almond Blossom, and this one is described as an aqua with a large particle pink to peach to gold to green shifting shimmer and a dainty holo. So we are back to the plain shimmer kind of finishes, and again this one had a really smooth buttery formula. I think I would describe this more on the crelly side or maybe like a milky jelly, because as you can see it is definitely sheer and light on that first coat, but I do find it to be very buildable, where you still see a hint of nail line on 2 coats, but then it gets even more obscured with 3, but it's just not fully opaque, you know? Either way, I absolutely love this one. It's just such a beautiful color, and I'm a big fan of all those color shifts. The other magnetic in the collection is called Cobalt Sky, and this is a cobalt blue with a cyan magnetic shimmer and a blue-violet background shimmer along with a dainty holo. Again, I had that weird experience where it looked like it didn't have a strong magnetic effect when I held it against the bottle, but as you can see, holding the magnet against my nail, it's definitely really crisp. This had a really beautiful formula. It was a little bit sheer and almost patchy looking on that first coat, but because the shade is just so dark and pigmented, I found that it was fully opaque on just 2 coats alone. So this looked amazing whether you wear it in the cat eye effect or even the velvet effect. Next we have another thermal. This one is called Irises, and it's described as a purple when cold, as seen here in the bottle, that transitions to a turquoise or aqua shade when warm. And this one also has a green to indigo to violet aurora shimmer and a dainty holo. So hopefully, as you can see, I'm starting to run a bit warm, so you can see that more turquoise color. And I really, really love this one. I just thought it was so beautiful. Again, a really flawless formula that wasn't as sheer as I was expecting it to be. So even in 2 coats in the warm state, I found that it was opaque enough for me. The last thermal is Vanishing Violet, and this one is described as a purple when cold, as seen in the bottle, that transitions to a blurple when warm. This also has an electric blue-violet aurora shimmer and a dainty holo. I found that this one had a little bit more of that squishy jelly kind of formula, but it still was easy to apply. I unfortunately just kind of took off some of the polish with the very last swipe that I did, so I had a little bit of a bald spot in the middle. I do think it evened out nicely on 2 coats, but in real life I could notice that it's just a bit more sheer, so I do think a 3rd coat was really just going to help the shade look like a complete manicure. It just looks so much more full coverage, especially in the warm state, which is the lighter color, and even in the cold state it just looks so vibrant. And rounding out the collection, we have Frailty, which is a pinky purple jelly filled with a large particle gold to green to indigo shifting shimmer, a green to indigo to violet aurora shimmer, color shifting reflective glitter, and a dainty hollow sparkle. In a shock to absolutely nobody, this is my favorite from the collection. I was so looking forward to trying this one on. It had a really beautiful formula. As described, it is more in that jelly base, so this one is definitely going to be sheer where you see some visible nail line, but it is absolutely packed with those shimmers and reflective glitters. So I feel like in most lighting, the visible nail line is obscured enough, but I still would recommend doing 3 coats just to build up the base color even more. I will say though, I didn't really notice the color shifting reflective glitter. It just kind of looked pink to me. Lastly, I did want to share swatches of Chihuly, which is a glitter topper that was created by members of Fauve's Facebook group. I'm honestly not sure how often she plans on doing, polishes like this, but if that sounds exciting to you, I would highly recommend joining her Facebook group. But as you can see, this is a clear base filled with assorted bar glitters and hex glitters, mainly in rainbow colors, but are not holographic, which I actually really love. I feel like the bar glitters here just look more like sprinkles than anything, so I was actually a big fan of this topper. I think I would say my favorite was how it looked over white. It just pops so much. And here is the collage of the Van Gogh collection. I tried to put them in rainbow order, but it is kind of hard since 3 of them are thermals, those being Electric Reverie, Irises, and Vanishing Violet. Here they are in the warm state, and you can see that Electric Reverie and Absinthe Minded are the most similar, not exact dupes, but definitely very close. But then in the cold state, it looks much closer to Delirium. Meanwhile, the cold state of Irises and Vanishing Violet become this darker purple color, but I would say Vanishing Violet is a lot darker, not to mention they have different shimmers. Getting into comparisons, we're starting with Flare of Madness, and I wanted to show it next to Apocalypse's For the Pun of It and Crack's Cornea Killer. As I'm sure you can tell, both the Apocalypse and Cracked shade are more like true neons. Flare of Madness definitely is vibrant, but it's not neon by any means, so it does look a bit darker and more red compared to these other 2 shades. It is closer to Crack though, and even though I knew these weren't going to be similar, I figured I could still show it next to a couple of ILNP oranges. So first I pulled out Carved on the left and Pumpkin Patch on the right. I'd say that Pumpkin Patch has that more like autumnal kind of color to it. Carved is a bit closer, but it is like that flaky finish. So I figured I could also show it next to ILNP's Brightside, which is a little bit lighter, but that one's just not as red leaning as Flare of Madness, not to mention it's again a different formula. So for more of that warm reddish orange color, I thought I could show it next to ILNP's Melody, or at least a swatch stick of it, and I would say the shimmer color in Melody is the closest to Flare of Madness, but the base is a little too red. And lastly, I have Poems for a Harvest Moon from Mooncat, which I thought was going to be a lot closer. That one's more of like a true, or maybe like a pumpkin orange kind of base that has more of a pink shimmer head on instead of red. So I wouldn't call these exact dupes, but they're definitely the closest, at least in my collection. Next for Lunar Halo, I knew I had to show this next to Apocalypse's I Think I'm Going to Love You for a long time, as well as Mooncat's Demeter's Harvest. I think I would say Apocalypse is the most true like chartreuse color, where it's just a little bit more green. It also has more of a coppery shimmer instead of green, so I would say that Mooncat's Demeter's Harvest is the closest to Fauve, but that has a much more subtle green shimmer. Moving on to Van Gogh, apologies that it's not in the middle, but I wanted to compare it to Apocalypse's Endurance Survive, as well as Cirque's All In, which is more of a shimmer graphic formula, so it's not exactly the same, but color-wise, I feel like it is a little bit closer, especially because it has a copper shimmer in a green base, while Apocalypse is a smoother, finer gold shimmer. Next for Absinthe Minded, here it is next to Apocalypse, Jokes Like There's No Tomorrow, and Dreamland's Shake Your Shamrock, all of which are bright neon greens. So they might look similar in the bottle, but they're definitely very different on the nail. The biggest difference is that Absinthe Minded is the most sheer, and it also has a green shimmer, while Apocalypse is gold and Dreamland is blue. Here are the closest Mooncat shades. I pulled out my Bugs from the Nightmare Before Christmas collab, and Plankton, which is from the Mermaid Tales collection a few years ago. I would say the shimmer in Plankton is definitely very, very close to Absinthe Minded, but it's obviously a deeper green base. My Bugs is also a little bit more yellow leaning. Next, for Peacock Moth, I wanted to quickly show this next to Apocalypse's The Last of Them, which is like a glitter polish. It's not magnetic, but just for color reference, I thought they were kind of similar, but Apocalypse is more olivey. For closer color comparisons, here it is next to ILNP's Frankie, which is a green magnetic from a previous Halloween release, as well as Cirque's Cannabliss, which was a previous 420 polish. I thought they were going to be exact dupes, but I think both ILNP and Cirque are just like a little bit darker in their green bases especially, but they do have the same kind of yellowy gold magnetic shimmer. I also did try to add a blue flaky on top of ILNP and Cirque, but it just didn't stand out as much as it does in Fauve. I did also want to show Peacock Moth next to Holo Taco's Full Charge, mainly for color reference. Obviously, Holo Taco is not magnetic, it's just a linear holo, and it doesn't have flakies in it, but I feel like Peacock Moth unmagnetized is kind of close color-wise, just not enough to be a dupe. Next, for Delirium, I knew I had to show this next to Apocalypse's Barrier Fangs and Cirque's Kokomo. As I'm sure you can tell though, those are just a little bit more of like true teal colors, so you can see just how green Delirium leans. But again, because it has such a vibrant and glowy blue shimmer, it just kind of ends up pulling teal on the nails, but I still wouldn't call them dupes. I don't really have any similar Mooncat shades. I thought maybe the closest was River Styx, but that's more of like a true cerulean aqua kind of color with a green shimmer. And as a reminder, Electric Reverie is one of the thermals in the collection, so I thought to compare it to Holo Taco's Funny Feeling from their thermal collection last year. These both have more or less the same kind of color shifts, where they're that limey chartreuse shade in the warm state as seen on my thumb, and they both transition to a teal color when cold as seen on the swatch stick. But they're not exact dupes because Fauve has that strong glowy green shimmer while Holo Taco has a dainty hollow sparkle. The cold state of Electric Reverie actually kind of reminded me of Ethereal's Haunted Furby, which was a previous polished pickup shade. That one does have a really strong green shimmer that kind of looks similar to Fauve, but the biggest difference is the base color, where it's just a lot darker in Ethereal. Next, for Almond Blossom, I wanted to quickly show it next to Arabesque and Gogh from the Impressionism collection, just because I thought this was kind of like an in-between shade. If anything, it's a little bit more similar to Impression Sunrise, or at least the cold state of it, which is what's on the swatch stick, but I would say that Impression Sunrise has more of like a sky blue kind of color, while Almond Blossom really leans a little bit more aqua. And the shimmer color is also different, where it's pink in Impression Sunrise and more golden in Almond Blossom. Some other shades I thought it was similar to were Cirque's Tipsy Turvy and ILNP's Skate Date. Of these two, I think ILNP is a little bit closer to that aqua base color especially. Cirque's is like a little bit more in that sky blue kind of category, but the shimmer in Cirque and ILNP are more the same, where it's like orangey as opposed to golden yellow head on. Moving on to Cobalt Sky, I wanted to quickly show it next to some other previous Fauve shades just for color reference. Here it is next to Fading Horizon and Twinkling Tides. In a similar vein, here it is next to some recent Apocalypse blues like Shock Jock and the Upside Down. Obviously, Shock Jock is a lot lighter, but it might be hard to tell here on camera, but I do think Apocalypse's The Upside Down is a lot darker and a little bit more purple leaning. The closest when it comes to actual blue magnetics, I think, are Holo Taco's Twice in a Blue Moon and Starly's Oceanic Moonlight. They all definitely have that same like lighter aqua sort of magnetic shimmer and a dainty hollow sparkle. The base colors are like slightly different from each other, where Holo Taco is the darkest and Starly is a little bit more vibrant. Lastly, Cobalt Sky actually reminded me of this Morgan Taylor shade called Ride the Wave, which is not a magnetic, it's just a shimmer with a holographic kind of glitter running throughout. I think they just look more similar in the bottle though. On the nail, Morgan Taylor is a little bit lighter, more like cerulean leaning. Moving on to irises, I had to show this next to Apocalypse's Lose Our Minds Together, which is a thermal that transitions from purple to teal, and it's also packed with a vibrant green shimmer, so on paper they sound like they're going to be dupes. Apocalypse does have a larger holographic sparkle, but even the colors of the transition shades are just like slightly off. I did also want to compare irises next to a couple of other fauve blurples like Glimmering Water and Evening Mist. Those are more true like blurple shades, while irises, at least in the cold state, is like a true purple. So on the nail, I would say it looks closest to Evening Mist if you're wearing it unmagnetized, but the shimmer color is a little different. And here is irises next to some more blurples that lean more purple this time. So I have Sunset Skies on the left, which is a magnetic, and Transient Light on the right, which is a thermal similar to irises, but that one goes from that blurple color when cold to a softer kind of pink color when warm, which you might be able to see near the cuticle area. So they're kind of similar, but not really. And the last comparisons for this shade are to Mooncat's Dark Night of the Soul and Holo Taco's Midnight Rodeo from their most recent collection. I thought at least one of these was going to be more similar to irises, being like a dark, moody purple with a vibrant blue shimmer, but Mooncat is just a little too dark in its base. Midnight Rodeo is a little bit closer, but more red leaning, I think. Moving on to Vanishing Violet, I was immediately reminded of shades like Kiwi Shimmer's My Favorite Color and Holo Taco's Electric Sweetener, both being these vibrant purples with blue shimmer, but as you can see, they're just not as dark as the cold state of Vanishing Violet or as blue toned. So I actually thought the more similar colors were Mooncat's Twilight Sonata or Everybody Scream from the Nightmare Before Christmas collab. Even though that one is like a micro glitter type of formula, color-wise it's pretty similar. Twilight Sonata is also a thermal, so in the cold state as seen in the bottle, it is too dark, but I noticed that the warm state of the color, which is on the right half of my thumb, is more similar to the cold state of Vanishing Violet, if that makes sense. So they're similar, but not exact dupes. And finally, for Frailty, I wanted to quickly show this next to Cracked Polish's Home by 9, which I had just gotten in the mail, but as you can see, that one's a little too light and too pink. The base in Frailty is actually kind of similar to Polish for Days Lush, but as you know, Lush has a super intense shimmer and there's no extra sparkle in that. I thought some closer shades were maybe Holo Taco's Sparkling Spurs from the recent Disco Cowboy collection and ILNP's Amped from the Electric Summer collection, both of those being like these pinky purple leaning colors. Amped also has like a matching green kind of shimmer similar to Frailty, but as I'm sure you can tell, both Holo Taco and Amped are just a bit deeper, maybe more purple leaning, less pink than Frailty, and they're also obviously more opaque compared to the jelly base. I think the closest shade in my collection is Mooncat's Serpent's Tongue, which is a micro glitter type of formula, so it's going to be more opaque and less jelly like Frailty is. So it is going to be a little bit deeper, more purple leaning, but it does have a similar green shimmer and hollow sparkle. So that wraps up my swatches and comparisons of Fauve's Van Gogh 1.0 collection. As always, I would love to know your thoughts on this release because obviously I think it's so beautiful. As you saw, the formulas and polishes themselves were just really stunning, but the color palette is like my favorite thing. Even though it is missing like a red, it's basically a rainbow palette, and I'm just always a fan of those, especially as we get closer to summer. But I can acknowledge that a lot of these shades are like a little repetitive, whether it is to polishes like in the collection itself or even just to previous Fauve shades, like specifically the blurple. And in addition to the collection just being much larger, I know that can also be intimidating. So I always like to look at the silver lining in that, where she's just giving you a lot of options so you can choose which one or maybe two you just like the best, as opposed to picking up like the whole collection. At least that's how I see it in my mind, where just being more practical, I personally wouldn't be able to buy like big collections, but I love having the subtle differences where, you know, maybe I do like a specific color, but I'm not a fan of that particular finish. Well, good news is that there's another polish probably in her catalog that's like a little bit different that I might like more. And as I just mentioned, this is the 1.0 collection, so that means there is a 2.0 collection coming soon too, I think later in the summer, but that one I believe is going to be more focused on like darker and moody shades. I do wonder how many of those are going to be in the blue and purple kind of category, but either way, I'm looking forward to seeing them because, as you know, I'm just a big fan of Fauve and their brand, and I think their collections are just so well curated. If you haven't even checked out like their website before, they do these side-by-sides with the polishes and their inspiration, and it's just so satisfying to me. Anyway, as far as this collection goes, it's going to be launching on Sunday, May 18th at noon Eastern time. As with previous Fauve collections, it is going to be on a pre-order basis, and I did see that she did note there are limited quantities available. I personally don't know if each of these listings is going to have like their own individual caps, similar to Polish Pickup, for example. But either way, I will have Fauve's website linked down below, whether you do want to pick these up or just browse the site for some inspiration. If you are planning on picking something up, I would love to know which ones are your favorites. But even if you don't plan on grabbing anything, I do hope that you like the video, especially if you found the comparisons helpful. But thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!